Boeing's crisis is deepening. The airline manufacturer suffering yet another mid-air incident.
A terrifying situation unfolding in the sky. A portion of the plane blew off in mid-flight.
Panels flying off planes, government investigations, and the latest, a whistleblower found dead.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Now, if you're about to take a flight, perhaps a holiday or a business trip, there's a very good chance it's going to be on a plane made by Boeing. And given all the shocking news recently, it's only reasonable to wonder if their planes are safe. Now, in a moment, we're going to be hearing from a panel of aviation experts, including a whistleblower who has an important warning. But first, a quick reminder of what's been going on at Boeing.
Another scare in the air for United Jet. A Boeing 737 that left San Francisco arrived in Oregon with a missing panel.
Terrifying incident on that Alaska Airlines flight. The door plug blown out of a Boeing 737.
The plane basically stopped. Like it almost, the best way to describe it is it's dropped out of the air.
What is wrong at Boeing? We're only in March and already there have been 3 serious incidents this year. A couple of weeks ago, a Boeing 737-800 United Airlines plane landed in Oregon with a panel missing from the fuselage. In this case, the passengers didn't notice. But 5 days earlier, passengers flying from Australia to New Zealand on LATAM Airlines were very alarmed when their Boeing 787 suddenly lost altitude, flinging some of them to the ceiling. Dozens were injured. The Wall Street Journal reported that a flight attendant accidentally flipped a switch on the pilot's seat that sent him flying into the plane's controls. At the beginning of the year, something even more frightening. A door section blew out during a flight, leaving a large hole in the side of the Alaska Airlines Boeing 737. Passengers' belongings and clothes were sucked out of the aircraft, but fortunately no one was sitting next to the hole and no one was seriously injured. US investigators believe that safety bolts needed to keep the so-called door plug in place had been removed during recent maintenance and not put back. US regulators aren't happy.
Boeing has not provided us with the documents and information that we have requested numerous times over the past few months.
For Boeing, any incident involving its 737 models is particularly concerning. 2 737 MAXes actually crashed within 5 months of each other just a few years ago, killing hundreds. The first incident was in October 2018. An Indonesian airline, Lion Air, Flight 610, crashed into the Java Sea minutes after taking off from Jakarta Airport. All 189 passengers were killed. In March the following year, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed, again shortly after takeoff from Addis Ababa Airport, this time killing 157 people. Both tragedies involved the 737 MAX models. A large part of the blame was put on an onboard system called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, combined with faulty so-called angle of attack sensors on the outside of the jet. In both crashes, it seems that the sensors were sending erroneous information to the MCAS, which is designed to stop a plane from stalling. One way in which it does that is by lowering the nose of the plane. That's what happened in Indonesia and Ethiopia. The plane's nose was lowered when it didn't need to be. The pilots in both cases were also criticised. Following these crashes, the global Boeing 737 MAX fleet was grounded for 20 months. A coroner in the UK investigating the deaths of British passengers on the Ethiopia Airlines flight ruled that they had been unlawfully killed. Internal communications released in January 2020 show employees had been worried about the safety of the 737 for years before the Indonesia crash. 5 incidents in just over 5 years involving 5 different airlines, all but one incident involving Boeing 737s, and in Auckland it was the Boeing 787. And the share price says it all. Over the last 5 years, Boeing's share price has fallen 45%, whereas shares in its great European rival Airbus have risen by about the same amount. Founded over a century ago in Seattle, Boeing is not just a plane maker, it is a symbol of US greatness. It even makes Air Force One, the president's plane. But this American icon, once the king of the air, lost its crown to Airbus after the 2019 crash. And although the 2 plane makers still control almost the entire global commercial aircraft market, Boeing is steadily losing market share to Airbus. and the bad headlines just keep on coming.
More problems for Boeing. Another plane forced to make an emergency landing.
Some passengers are losing faith in the safety of Boeing planes.
What has gone wrong, and can Boeing emerge from this crisis?
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And today we have Alan Diehl, a former air crash investigator who actually survived a crash himself, and Ed Pierson, a former Boeing employee and whistleblower who testified before Congress. And finally, we have Arthur Rosenberg, an aviation attorney, pilot and engineer. Welcome to the program, all of you. Ed Pierson, we're coming up to the summer holidays, well, spring holidays, summer holidays and so on. Lots of people will want to be taking flights, also business trips. And the recent news coming out of Boeing will make them wonder, is it safe to take that aircraft?
That's a very difficult question to answer because historically I would say the answer is yes, but I think the evidence currently shows that with certain airplanes like the 737 MAX, that's not correct, and I don't think that airplane is safe.
What would be your recommendation to Boeing then regarding those particular type of aircraft?
My recommendation to Boeing, our foundation has already stated that we believe that that plane should be grounded. Both the 737-8 and 737-9, and thoroughly investigated because we're continuing to find problems with that airplane.
And there are, is it true, hundreds of those planes currently flying?
There's over 1,300 of those planes flying worldwide. In the United States, there's somewhere on the order of, I want to say about 500. But yeah, there's a lot of planes out there that these airplanes are flying, and a lot of people are focused on the 737-9 because of the Alaska accident. But we've been looking at data from the -8, which is also concerning.
Arthur Rosenberg, the 737 MAX was the plane in question during the Alaskan Airlines scandal when the door flew off. But do you share Ed Pierson's concerns to that degree?
Yeah, so first off, let me say, I know of Ed's reputation. He's highly regarded and respected, but I humbly disagree with his conclusion. To the listeners, in terms of getting on a 737 MAX, I fly all over the planet all the time. From my point of view, the public can take solace in the fact that I believe the plane is safe. On the other hand, the plane has had a torrid history of safety issues, from design defects, the tragedy with Ethiopia and Lion Air, and more currently with this complete manufacturing debacle, these self-inflicted wounds that Boeing has installed on itself in an effort to pump out more and more planes to meet airlines requirements, profit loss, Wall Street requirements, keep the stock up. It's a deadly mix, so to speak. With airplanes, it's safety first above all else. Sure. And our grandfather's Boeing was like that. The current version of Boeing since '97, when they bought out McDonnell Douglas, is an entirely different company with an entirely different philosophy. And the recent tragedies speak for themselves.
We'll touch on Boeing culture and how it's changed a little later in the program. But Ed, a quick response there to Arthur.
Well, I respectfully disagree 100%. I mean, even the FAA has come out and said just in the last month that they have done a safety culture audit that lasted over a year, and they've seen how many problems they've had with that. They've had also a production audit, which has just been recently completed. And just as recently as yesterday, the FAA Administrator Whitaker indicated he was very unhappy with what he was seeing in the 737 factory when he visited. And the data, just to give you a small sampling of the data we're looking at, Alaska Airlines alone, in a 2-year span of time before their accident, had over 1,200 aircraft system malfunctions on 53 brand new airplanes. So that doesn't sound like normal business as usual to me.
Alan Diehl, we have an interesting split here between our two experts so far. You used to work for the National Transportation Safety Board. On which side of this debate do you come down?
Well, I also work for the Air Force and a couple of manufacturers. I've designed airplane cockpits, and I agree that the MAX was a disaster. When they brought it out, they rushed it into production. I think they're fixing some of the problems, but they haven't fixed all of them. And I have called for the FAA to mandate 2 additional warning systems. This is not going to solve all the MAX's problems, but the pilots need to know when that automation, it's called an MCAS system, is operating. They need an oral enunciator, just like whoop, whoop, pull up when you're too low. It needs to tell the pilots MCAS active, okay? The other thing they need to know, if the angle of attack indicators disagree, the pilots need to know that instantly so they can react by throwing a couple of switches. I've lobbied for that. So far, Boeing hasn't put that on. The FAA has not mandated it, but I think they can save the MAX, but they sure are off to a bad start. And Boeing needs to get back to basics. I agree with actually both of my co-speakers here. There's a lot of problems out there.
Alan, I thought that they said that they had resolved the MCAS problem.
Well, they've reduced the power of it by something like 75%. It's not as powerful as it was in Indonesia or Ethiopia, where they lost the airplanes. But the pilots, it's human nature. It's the way pilots operate. When something starts going wrong, they try to troubleshoot. I'm an aviation psychologist, and I can tell you, when you get, even with the new system, when it starts to run away with you, you're at low altitude and it's shoving your nose down, you don't have time to troubleshoot. You need to know what's causing that, and an oral enunciator that says MCAS active would instantly educate, warn the pilots what to do. They have it on a ground proximity warning system and many other systems. I think that's what they need. That's a partial fix. I'm sure Ed would say that's not the whole story, and he's right.
Ed, what else is there?
Well, one thing there's electrical defects. I mean, it's clear if you read the Ethiopian final accident report on page 229 and 230, it speaks to those production defects that occurred on those planes. The other issue that you need to understand is the MCAS software. I agree with Alan that the alerting information is non-existent. I mean, this is a big problem with the 37. It has an outdated, obsolescent crew alerting system. It's the only Boeing airplane, and for that matter, only major airplane, commercial airplane, that lacks a modern day alerting system for the pilots that gives them a checklist of what needs, the troubleshooting that they have to go through. I mean, a big problem that you have to also understand is it's not necessarily one particular emergency that could cause a problem. The problem gets into when you have multiple compounding emergencies, and the pilots can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. They can get saturated. I think that's what Alan's referring to, and I 100% agree with that.
As a pilot yourself, Arthur, do you accept what they're saying about this overwhelming the pilots?
Yeah, well, look, to the uninitiated listening public to what we're talking about now, with all due respect to my other two panelists, I think it's a little irresponsible to be saying that you have a 737 MAX, which is not safe for flight. Yes, we're in the middle of litigation, Ethiopian Lion Air with Boeing. The MCAS system, in its original version, was an absolute death trap for pilots. They didn't even know that the system was on the airplane. It's been largely redesigned. You could characterize it as Band-Aid fixes, but there are Band-Aid fixes which work. There is redundancy. There's redundant angle of attack indicators now feeding into the system, where in the past, Ethiopian Lion Air, there was only one. There's a whole myriad of changes, software changes. It's largely safe. I'm not going to get into the design aspect now. The 737 MAX was never a clean slate airplane. It's a bit of a Rube Goldberg contraption going back to a 737 from the 60s and the 70s, right up to the present time. I think about 17,000 of these planes in all its versions have been manufactured. The problem that Boeing has now, plain and simple, is not a design defect. It's a manufacturing problem. They're record keeping. They're what I believe to be deep sixing manufacturing problems with the airplane. We can get into it. It's all in an effort to pump out airplanes. Fun fact. They're producing about 38 planes a month now. So think about that. That's more than one every single day of these giant airplanes. Their manufacturing processes, their internal protocols and procedures are not up to snuff. They want to ramp it up to 60. The FAA said, yes, they've just finished an audit. They have 90 days to come up with revisions to their manufacturing processes and plans. But it's all in an effort to earn more money And as the administrator said yesterday, it's safety first above all else.
Okay.
Boeing has not done that recently. They're in the business of pumping out airplanes.
Ed,
I don't know what data my colleagues are looking at here, but there have been stab trim motor failures. There have been flight management computer failures, anti-icing system failures, speed trim failures, on and on. There's been a boatload of evidence of manufacturing defects in these airplanes. I personally wrote a letter to the CEO of Alaska in April advising him that he was having a lot of issues with his production defects and recommended they shut down. Our foundation wrote a report in September and we went into great detail. So I don't know, I'm a little frustrated sometimes when I hear very strong comments about manufacturing, because the truth of the matter is that manufacturing is a huge problem, and so has the design. Just this week, like 7 days ago, Boeing put out another message through the FAA saying the airplane is having uncommanded rolls of the plane, not commanded by the pilots, uncommanded rolls, and the cause of this is a spoiler deploying off the wing inadvertently, and that cause is from a electrical wire bundle that is improperly installed and it's chafing. And if you know anything about electrical issues on the airplane, you know that's a very dangerous situation to be in. So I think we need to really step back and say the entire system is under pressure, right? Airlines are under pressure. The maintenance organizations are under pressure. They're trying to train more pilots. This problem is way, way bigger than just one little particular segment. And I think we need to make sure that we are honest about these problems, because we keep acting, you know, before the Alaska accident occurred, the senior leadership of the Boeing company went out multiple times indicating that the planes were perfectly safe. How many times did we hear the Boeing company and experts out there say the plane is perfectly safe, and then a door rips off and we could have lost all those people? And trust me, this is more problems than just a couple bolts. Even the NTSB has not been able to get information out of the Boeing company.
Yes, that is a concern. Let's bring that up with Alan, if I may, you know, formerly of the NTSB. Is Boeing not being transparent with it?
No, absolutely not. It appears chairwoman of the NTSB said they failed to produce evidence, documentation on who or whom failed to install those 4 bolts. So no, the NTSB is not happy.
Ed, we've been talking a lot about Boeing, and as we should be. Of course, the other major player in this market, the major rival, if you like, is Airbus, the European plane manufacturer. How do you compare the two plane makers' records, safety records?
Listen, I'm not claiming to be an expert on Airbus planes. I will tell you that the Boeing company is very much capable of building high-quality airplanes. What is concerning to me is that people forget that they do try to do a comparison. Airbus didn't have 2 fatal crashes on brand new planes. A 2-month-old or 4-month-old plane didn't go through a $20 billion plus loss of value and isn't involved in criminal hearings right now. So, you know, I don't want to try to compare between Boeing and Airbus. I'm just saying that we can do a lot better. And the Boeing company is capable. It's a leadership failure, plain and simple.
Alan, could you compare the two plane makers' safety record for me?
Well, when I've looked at the statistics over the years working for the government, roughly the two manufacturers have very similar historical records. Other people have pointed out that, yeah, Boeing has had some problems with the MAX in particular lately, but they're roughly comparable. And I think they're both capable of producing a quality product. But Boeing has lost its way in recent years.
Let's just pause for a minute to hear from the Boeing whistleblower John Barnett, who supposedly killed himself earlier this month. Mr. Barnett spoke to the media back in January after the door plug blew off the Alaskan Airlines Boeing 737.
This is not a 737 problem, it's a Boeing problem. And I know the FAA's gone in and they've done due diligence and inspections to assure that the door plugs of the 737 are installed properly and the fasteners are torqued properly. But my concern is, what's the rest of the airplane? What's the rest of the condition of the airplane?
Mr. Barnett was in the process of suing Boeing, his former employer, for allegedly undermining his career after he raised numerous safety concerns. For example, that Boeing had allegedly used defective parts to ensure production wasn't delayed. Boeing has issued a statement saying, "We are saddened by Mr. Barnett's death and our thoughts and prayers are with his friends and family." Ed Pierson, you were a whistleblower at Boeing. I'm just wondering, broadly, what kinds of pressures do whistleblowers face?
Well, broadly speaking, I think whistleblowers are trying to shine a light on things that are not right. And so most whistleblowers, certainly the people I've studied and in my own case, spend a lot of energy trying to get the internal organization to recognize these problems. I tried to get the factory shut down because of all the production issues back in 2018. So I think broadly speaking, that's the most frustrating thing is you're just trying to be a good employee. It shouldn't be unusual. People should be comfortable, be able to speak up and say something's wrong. And the culture should be set up so that people receive that and they go through a process to address it. And so that's frustrating. And the other thing that's frustrating is there is a sensationalism to it. But I think it's fair to say that most whistleblowers are some of your most dedicated people, and they really want the company to be successful. I truly want the Boeing company to be successful. It's important to our economy. It's important to our national security. Likewise, I want our regulators to be successful.
What were your complaints at the time, the major complaints you were making at the time, and were they addressed adequately?
Well, it wasn't just my complaints. There's thousands of employees that work in the factory where the 737 is manufactured. We were having a lot of problems with huge schedule pressure. 38 airplanes that we're talking about building now, we were building 50 plus airplanes back then, and we weren't doing it safely. We were pushing these planes out the door, and even capping it at 38 right now is not a guarantee that the quality is going to be there, the manufacturing quality, which Arthur was mentioning as well. So I think the point I want to make is that these problems are serious problems, and they're not just about a couple mechanics missing a bolt. This is involving workers being worked ridiculously long hours, not having enough equipment, not having adequate training, airplanes being pushed down the line, whether they're completed or not, and having to do work outside in what they call the shadow factory. So there's a lot of issues here that are warning bells.
Arthur, some of the recent concerns around Boeing involve the use of, allegedly, the use of defective parts and excessive working hours. Now, why would Boeing, an icon of American industry, allegedly cut corners in this way?
Yeah, so it's a very simple answer. It's in an effort to pump out and sell as many airplanes as you can. And if I could just touch on a couple of the other things that we talked about with whistleblowers generally. Boeing's culture did not encourage quality control people to step forward to talk about defective parts, documenting defective parts, chafing problems, oxygen cap, things that were defective and slowed up the manufacturing process. They inhibited it. What happened internally inside the company? This is all a matter of public knowledge now, some under criminal investigation, some under other forms of investigation. But the bottom line is it's all in a culture to sacrifice, in my view, safety in an effort to get out as many airplanes as Boeing can possibly do.
Alan, as a former regulator and investigator yourself, what's the most important thing that can be done to make sure Boeing does change its ways?
There was a major problem. In 1985, we had the worst accident in the U.S. Air Force. Air Force charters airliners. Maybe people don't know this. We don't carry all our cargo on military aircraft. They chartered an Aero Air DC-8. It crashed in Canada, killed over 250 people. And the Congress said, that can't happen again. If you're going to put these American troops on these airplanes, you, the Air Force, have got to independently inspect the airlines. You can't just say the FAA gave them a certificate so we can force the GIs to ride it. So what they did is they put together a SWAT team and they went out to the airlines with active duty Air Force mechanics and pilots. And guess what we found? There was a lot of difference in the quality. All right. We need to do that on a much larger scale with a FAA group of temporary hirees to go into the Boeing plants. This is going to cost like $1 billion over a 3-year period. But you're going to have, I think we need to do something like that. We need an FAA SWAT team of inspectors and quality control people. And oh yes, I would send the bill to Boeing. They created the problem. The FAA fined them $2.5 billion already. I'd say this is going to cost you another $1 billion but we're going to be looking over your shoulders to ensure those pledges that you make about quality are carried out.
Ed Pierson, just a final question for you. We spoke to the mother of one of the Americans who died in the Ethiopian Airlines crash in 2019, and she wants the current CEO, Dave Calhoun, to resign. Would that be a fair outcome? Is that necessary?
I agree 100% with her. I would say that that's not enough. Getting the CEO, Calhoun, out is one step, but honestly, the entire C-suite, they're out of touch with what's happening on the production systems of the Boeing company. And I mean, the good news is you could remove the CEO and the COO and the CFO and all those folks, and it would have very little impact on what happens at these airplane programs, which are essentially run by themselves. So I think that the clean house, get the new leadership in at the corporate level. The board of directors need to ask themselves some hard questions like, are they actually doing their job to monitor their fiduciary responsibilities and overseeing the Boeing company? This is all fixable. This is all fixable, but you have to admit these problems exist before you fix them. You've got to stop denying that these things are occurring.
Ed Pierson, Arthur Rosenberg, and Alan Diehl, thank you all very much. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.